going to read you this story, and then we'll go from there. The story is told of two inseparable friends who enlisted together, trained together, shipped out together, and fought in the trenches together during World War I. During an attack, one of the duo was critically wounded in a field filled with barbed wire obstacles, and because of that, he was unable to crawl back to his foxhole. The entire area was under enemy fire, and it was suicidal to try to reach him. Nevertheless, undaunted, his friend decided to give it a go. Before he could get out of his own trench, his sergeant yanked him back and told him, "You are a madman. It is far too late. You can't do him any good, and you will only end up getting yourself killed." A few minutes later, the officer turned his back, and instantly his mate went after his friend. Shortly afterwards, he staggered back, mortally wounded, with his friend now dead in his arms. The sergeant was both angry and deeply moved. "What a waste," he blurted out. "He's dead and you're dying. It just wasn't worth it." With almost his last breath, the dying soldier retorted, "Oh yes, it was. For when I got him, the only thing he said was, 'I knew you would come, Jim.'" He says, "I knew you would come, Jim." What is so crazy and ironic about this story is this is two soldiers that stood side by side. They trained together. They learned the system together. They were willing to go to battle together. And when it came down to it, they were willing to be faithful to one another, regardless of the situation. And so they're put in World War I, and now the friend has been shot and he's been wounded, but the other friend is so faithful to the service of brotherhood and what they had, that he was willing to risk his life, only to try to save his friend. Even if he couldn't save his friend, he was willing to die. And what's so crazy and ironic about this story is these are two soldiers that are willing to stand up and die for our cause, just for brotherly love or brotherly bond. But what gets me is, how much more would it be for us as Christians be willing to be faithful to God, being faithful, being willing to endure, to go through whatever it is, just to get the good news to our brother and our sister. Because whether you believe it or not, there are our brothers and sisters out there in this world today, and they are dying. They are lost. They have no direction to go. They have no one to even show them how to get there. They have no one to show them, what do you do? How do you start? You'd be surprised and amazed if you go out on these streets today and you ask some people, who is God? Who is Jesus? What does Easter mean? What does Christmas mean? What do holidays bring? You would be surprised of some of the answers that you would get. And probably what you would probably get is some would have their own understanding or their own preconceived notion of how they think of what these things mean. So basically what I'm saying is there is a dying world out there, and they're searching, y'all. Church, they're searching. They're looking for hope. They're looking for answers. And I come by to tell you, they're not finding it in the world. They're not finding it in the parties. They're not finding it in the clubs. Where are they going to find it out? They need to find it in the church. So it is all the more for us to be so adamant, to be so much faithful, to give hope to a lost and a dying world. But you have to understand and ask yourself, is it worth it? Is it worth it? And if it's worth it, and if he means much more to you than life itself, you will want to be faithful as these two men were that we will look at and read today. So as my title of the topic of today, what we will talk about is, what does it take to be a faithful man of God? Or what does it take to be a faithful man or a woman of God? Well, the first thing is, I want to come by and encourage you today. God can use you in spite of your past. Now, I don't know if you know, but I read about Timothy and I read about Epaphroditus. I don't know if you know too much about them, but Timothy, his mom was a Jew. His dad was a Greek, meaning he was a non-believer, or he didn't believe. So, meaning he maybe could have came from a dysfunctional family. He could have came from a dysfunctional family, but in spite of the dysfunctional, God can still use Timothy, and he used Timothy greatly. Not only just that, but Timothy's grandmother played a great role in her mother's life. So because she played a great role in her daughter's life, then the daughter played a great role in the son's life. And see, what all that came about was because one was willing to be faithful. I come by to encourage you today, church. You can be a faithful man or woman of God in spite of your past. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter what you've been through. It doesn't matter what you think you've gone through. It doesn't matter. God doesn't see the past. When he's looking for a faithful heart, he's looking for one that will be fully dedicated, fully surrendered, fully focused, and fully devoted to him. And if you have those things, then he can use you in great ways. In the past, he can deal with that. There is nothing too hard for God. But us as believers, or us, sometimes what we're going to do is we want to dwell on the past. It's nothing wrong sometimes for us to reflect on our past and see what our past and where our past has brought us. But sometimes when we dwell on the past and we look at the past and we start to ponder on the past, sometimes the past has too much hurt for us to understand. Sometimes the past has too much brokenness for us to understand and feel that God can mend that. Sometimes the past has so much sin and has so much addiction and has so much folly and so much hurt that we can't understand, could there really be a God that could deal with me in spite of me? And so sometimes when we dwell on our past, it could hinder us. But it's nothing wrong to reflect on your past, because sometimes when you reflect on your past, you see where you've come from. And when you see where you come from, you can see that what? There is a future that lies ahead for you. Look at Paul. If Paul was willing to constantly rely and dwell on his past, that he was a persecutor of Christians, that he was a persecutor of the church, that probably would have hindered him from the future of sharing the gospel. He could say, well, how could God use me in spite of this? How are these people going to accept me? How are these people going to come to understand the words that I'm teaching? Paul tells us in Galatians 1:10, what does he tell us? He says, if I was trying to be a pleaser of men, I wouldn't be a servant of God. Paul says, if I was trying to please the men, if I wanted to make the men happy, if I wanted to make the men understand that I'm a changed man, I'm different now, I'm a faithful man now, I love God now, listen to me, listen what I have to say. If Paul was trying to be a pleaser of men, he wouldn't be a servant of God. All God was saying is, Paul, you be faithful. You seek me. You trust me. You meditate on my word day and night, and let my words live in you and through you, and I will do the rest. God can use us in spite of our past. But the second thing is, it takes a faithful man of God who cares about fulfilling his duty for Christ. It takes a faithful man that cares about fulfilling his duty for Christ. Look at Timothy. His character shows how he lived his life. Timothy was a man that he loved God and he honored God and he served God. But even before Paul got to Timothy and he used him while he was on his missionary journeys, Paul did some research and word got back around that Timothy was a soldier. He was a warrior. He stood up at Lystra and Iconium for the faith. Timothy was known by his reputation, because what does his reputation precede? His reputation preceded that he was a man of God, that he was a man that wanted to fulfill the duties of Christ. is at us today. Men and women, if someone was to look at us and see our lifestyles and see our social media or talk to some of our friends or play back some video clips of our lifestyle, would that be our reputation today? Would our reputation be today that we would want to fulfill the duties of Christ? And if we are men and women of God that love God and honor God and want to know God, then that should be our duty. That should be what we want to do. The action should precede anything than what we say. That's what Timothy's life did. It doesn't mean he's not going to say something if he's not going to do it. That's what it means to be a faithful man and a woman of God. If you're going to be faithful before God, if you're going to say something, you might as well put the actions to word and do it. Because if you're not going to do it, why say it? And this is why the world doesn't want to come in here and deal with the church and live amongst us, because the church is saying that we're going to do this, is saying we're going to help them, is saying we're going to love them, is saying we want to serve them. But when we come to reach to them and we come to talk to them and interact with them, they don't feel the same love. They don't feel the same reciprocation as we say that we're saying what we're going to do for them. Faithful men and women of God are willing to fulfill the duty for Christ. As we look at it, we have a great example. What was Jesus' main focus? He said, is it to do my Father's will? When he was at the Garden of Gethsemane and all the sin was about to be poured upon him and all the pain and all the hurt, he was willing to what? Fulfill his Father's will. And Paul tells us that. He tells us that throughout this letter as he is encouraging the church at Philippi. What is he saying? Hey, church, let this mind be in you. Let this mind be in you. The mindset of Christ. Let this mindset be in you. Be humble, seek God, trust God. The same humility that Christ displayed for us is the same humility that we should display as a church. We must be focused on doing our Father's will. Because if we're not focusing on doing our Father's will, why are we having church? Why are we having church? Are we just playing church? Are we just coming to a building? Are we just gathering with some people and singing some songs and saying amen and raising our hands and saying this and doing this? But why are we having church if we don't want to fulfill the Great Commission? That we don't want to make disciples? That we don't want to reach the lost world? That we don't want to preach the gospel? Why are we having church? Because that's all church is. So we must ask ourselves. Timothy, he was willing to serve Paul by any means because he was like-minded with Paul. He was on one like mind with Paul, that he knew it was one Spirit, one God, one faith. Paul, even in the scriptures in the verses back, Paul said he couldn't find no one like Timothy in Rome. He said he couldn't find no one in Timothy like Rome, meaning that all were there out for their own gain, for their own glory. Yes, maybe in Rome there were some people that could have went back and gave this letter and could have went back and to minister to the church at Philippi. But Paul says, I can't find no one like Timothy. There's no one like Timothy. We have a bond, we have a connection, just like that story I read to you before I started today. The cadet went after his friend. Why? One can only imagine what he was thinking. He said, there is no one like my friend. There is no one like my brother. We did a lot of life together. We lived together. We had fun together. There was no one like him. That's what made him want to go back. One can only understand why he wanted to go back and get his friend. Is that any of us today? Do we have a Timothy? Are us, if we're men and women of God, if we're to disciple others and tell others about the goodness of God, do we have Timothys? Do we have someone looks up to us and says, man, there is no one like that brother. There is no one like that brother. He loves the Lord. He seeks to strive the Lord. I'm just so encouraged by him. I want to grow more like him. I want to know that passion and that desire and that faithfulness and that hope that he longs for. I want that. And that's what we are to be, church. who is your Timothy? Or not less than that, if you be a Timothy, who is your Paul? Who can you look up to and say, man, this brother helps me with my walk. This brother prays for me. This brother knows my struggle. This brother doesn't judge me. He loves me in spite of me. Who is your Paul? Basically, Timothy, he wanted to be used so much by God. He wanted to be used that he wanted to be found in the places where God was at. Timothy was a proven warrior and a soldier for Christ. No matter come what may, he said, I want to be used by God so much, I want to be where God is at. So if God is using Paul and that's where Paul is at, then that's where I want to go. If it's in Lystra and it's in Iconium, if it's in Philippi, if it's in Rome, if that means that I might lose my life, I might get sick, yeah, I'm going to count the cost because I want to not only be used by God, but I want to be where God is at. Is that any of us today, church? Do we have that mindset? Is that really what we think about today? I want to be where God is at. I want to be where the people of God are at. I don't want to be where people that are just shucking and jiving and saying this. I want to be where the people of God are at, that they want to kneel before Jesus, that they want to seek Jesus, that they want to long to know Jesus. I want to be where those people are at. I want to be where those people are at. No matter come what may, wherever they are, I'm willing to step up to the challenge. If those people are in South Dallas, that's where I want to be at. If those people are in West Africa, that's where I want to be at. If those people are in Indonesia, that's where I want to be at. Wherever God is at and those people are at and He's at, that's where I want to be. This is the attitude that Timothy had. Is that us today? But the third thing is, a faithful man that wants to be used by God is willing to take the risk and risk it all. He's willing to take risk and risk it all. Look at Epaphroditus, as we talk about Epaphroditus, he was willing to risk it all for the kingdom. We talked about that. Epaphroditus was one that was a co-worker and was a fellow brother to Paul. But does anybody know who Epaphroditus was?
He was a messenger.
He was a messenger. Not only was he a messenger, but he was named after Aphrodite, the pagan goddess of love. And yet, even though that God met him and he saved him, maybe his name didn't change, but his allegiance toward God changed. Epaphroditus' heart and his allegiance and surrender towards God changed. Not only that, but Epaphroditus was used. He was a messenger for the church at Philippi. So what he was doing is he was going from Philippi to Rome. That's why Epaphroditus was willing to serve not only God, but to serve his church. And what did he do? He went over 800 miles from Rome to Philippi in a 6 weeks journey just to deliver a bag of money to Paul. He was faithful before the Lord. He was faithful. He was willing to risk it all. Not just only that, but back in that age and time, there wasn't no doctors or there wasn't none of that. But that's what Epaphroditus did. He was willing to go deliver a bag of money to Paul in Rome. And then not only just that, he was willing to take care of Paul while he was in jail. He was willing to do his daily grocery shopping. He was willing to get some clothes for him. He was willing to go in and out through the city and do some city run-ins with Paul. If Paul maybe wanted to talk to some people or do some ministry, he was willing to go get those people and come back. He was willing to serve Paul. Why was he willing to serve Paul? Because he was willing to be faithful to his master. Church, if we're going to be faithful men and women of God that are going to faithfully serve the church and going to faithfully serve the people, we must be willing to faithfully serve our master first. When you look at someone that really wants to faithfully serve God and they want to faithfully do this, just look at how much when you look at people that want to faithfully serve the people and they say they want to do this, just look at how faithfully they serve God and it'll show you how much more they want to serve the people. Because at the end of the day, if their heart's truly after God, their heart is going to be what? Truly after the things of God. And what are the things of God? His heart is after what? The heartbeat of his people. So if we truly love God and honor God and we're faithful to God, then what? We're going to be faithful to God's people as well. Not only just that, but Epaphroditus, he got sick on his way. Like I said, he got sick. He had what you called Roman fever. And back in that day, Roman fever was something that a lot of people were dying from. Not people were surviving this. And like I said, there were no doctors back in that age and time. There were no pills. There were no medicines. Not only this, just that, but people couldn't even drink water back then. We think our water is purified and clear today. That's why people, Paul would encourage some of the people in Corinthians to drink wine a little bit, because wine was a little bit cleaner or purer than water, because water wasn't purified back in the day like it is today. And so there were no remedies and there were none of this. And what? But Epaphroditus was what? He was willing to be faithful. He was willing to be faithful no matter the risk, no matter what it was. He was willing to be faithful and serve Paul. And not only serve Paul, but serve his church. He was sick and he was ill. The Bible tells us back then, he says he was distressed. He was distressed. But the crazy thing about it is, Epaphroditus, he loved the Lord and he loved the people so much that he was more concerned about the welfare of what they thought of how he was doing rather than his own illness. So, because word had got back to Philippi that, hey, Epaphroditus, your messenger that you sent to go see Paul in Rome, he's sick and he's dying. And he might not make it. And so he was a little concerned. He's like, wow, I want to get back and let them know I'm doing well. The Lord has healed me. He was concerned. The distress, the word, the way they use distress is the same way in the meaning as distress as they used when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane. When he was distressed, when all the pain and the angst was going to come on him. Meaning he was more concerned about the people's sin than the pain that he was going to endure in the future. Jesus was more concerned about the love of his creation, the love of his creation, the love of the people, to deal with this penalty of sin, to deal with this once and for all. No matter the pain that he was enduring, he was concerned more about doing his Father's will and loving the people than in the midst of his situation. Church, us, if we're going to be faithful men and women of God, we must be willing to risk some things. What are we willing to risk today? Yeah, God may not be calling you to risk your lives, and he might not be calling you to risk this, but what if he's calling you to risk some financial things? What if he's calling you to risk some comforts and some things that you like to do on a daily basis? What if he's calling you to maybe change your location or change your area code or whatever it may be? Are we willing to risk those things? For the glory of Christ, but not only for the glory of Christ, but that others can know Christ and we can win them to Christ. Are we willing to be faithful men and women of God? And the fourth thing is, a faithful man will one day receive his reward. Paul talks about it. He says, hey, I'm sending Epaphroditus back to you. He says, I'm sending him back to you. He is so excited. He is anxious to get back to you because he wants you to know that, hey, he's doing well. He thanks you for the prayers. He thanks you for the concern. But Paul says, hey, I am sending him back to you. And he says, when he gets back, I want you to give him some praise. I want you to honor him in a righteous way. I want you to exalt him in a righteous way. The same way that he's talking about as Paul is exalting Timothy and he's kind of exalting Epaphroditus as well. He's not doing it on a greater sense as exalting over the Lord. But what he is doing it is he is exalting these brothers. But if you look at it, what is the whole theme in the message of Philippians chapter 2 that what Paul is talking about? He's talking about what? Exalting and humbling ourselves, right? And humbling ourselves and what? And thinking of ourselves what? Thinking of our neighbor as ourselves. So that means exalting one another. And what is Paul ending this letter in chapter 2? He is what? He is exalting his brothers for their faithful service. And he's saying, hey, if I can exalt them, you should be able to exalt your brother and sister for their faithful service that they're doing for you and your local church. Is that us today, church? Do we exalt and lift up our brothers and sisters when they do good things? when they do good things for the Lord, when they make little progress and little striving, when they are trying to deal with this addiction, when they are trying to deal with this struggle, and we know that it is hard, and we know that it is trying, do we, just come alongside them and say, hey, keep it going, sister, keep it going, brother, I see what you're doing. You would be surprised with just a little, hey, keep it up. You're doing good. Keep striving. Don't give up. You would be surprised what that would do in someone's life. Because there again, are we just coming to church? Are we playing church? Or do we really want to have church? And if we really want to have church, this is what God is calling us to. He's calling us to be faithful men and women of God. There's too many faithless people out there. God he's not lacking for preachers. He's not lacking for evangelists. He's not lacking for deacons. He's not lacking for choir directors and ushers. He's not lacking for that at all, church. I don't know if you know. He's not lacking for that. He's going to get the glory regardless. He's worth all the glory, and he's going to get the glory regardless. But what he's saying is, he says, I want to use you for the glory of me, but for your greater good. And is that us today? Are we willing to say, God, you can use me. You can use me in any way that you want to. You can use me. You are worth it, God. You have shown yourself to be faithful. The other things that I put before you, the other people that I put before you, what I do in my life, they don't prove to be faithful, but you are faithful, God. You can use me. Their resume, well, what they do for me, it hasn't lined up. They haven't shown that they can do and they can love me like you can. But you have. And what have you done? When I survey your wondrous cross and I see what the cross has done for me, and when I see what the cross makes available for me, and when I see how much the cross loves me in spite of me, you are worth it, God. You are worth it, for you can use me. Is that going to be any of us today, church? We say, God, use me. Use me, even if it's sitting at the door and watching the door and greeting the people, even if it's just welcoming the people, even if it's just helping my brother and sister get from point A to point B. However you want to use me, God, use me for the glory of you. Would that be any of us today, church? But the last thing, a faithful man will one day receive his reward. Church, a faithful man and a woman of God will receive their reward. If this earth is only a foretaste of glory divine, how much more will heaven be like? Not the place and the scenery or the position and where we will be, but when mortal will put on immortal and when corruptible will put on incorruptible. Not just listen to that, but listen what 1 John 3:2 tells us. He says, Beloved, we are children now, and what we will be has not yet appeared, but we know that when he appears, we shall be like him, because we shall see him as he is. You will get your reward one day, church. You might not get it here on earth. See, that's the big disconnect. That's why people don't want to follow God, and that's why people don't want to be faithful to God, and that's why people don't want to honor God, because they can't truly understand how God does rewards and blessings. They think if I'm faithful to you and I honor you, then God, you should give me these blessings. You should give me these things on earth. But God is saying, you're holding out. You're shorthanding yourself. If you knew what I had stored up for you, you would continue to be faithful. If you knew what I had stored up for you, you would meditate on my word more. If you knew that this earth can't compare to what I have for you, you would live for me. You would seek me more. You would pursue me more. You would sacrifice for me more. What more do I have to do? I've given you the cross. I've shown you the cross. What more can I do? How long do my arms have to be stretched out wide? How long? What will it take? We will get our reward. Whether you believe it or not, church. The older we get, life becomes more precious. But do you know why it becomes more precious? Because the life after this one means all the more. And that's why we seek, and that's why we try, strive, and pursue to know God and honor God. For the life after. I don't know about you, church, but this world, it's corrupt. Our systems are messed up. We're in debt, death, and sin, and murder, and all of this stuff is continuing to roam and rule over this world. And sometimes I'm just tired of it. And I want to be, one day I can live and I can be who God intended for me to be. I don't have to worry no more. I don't have to long no more. I don't have to worry about how I'm going to pay my next bill. I don't have to worry about where this is going to come from or what's going to happen the next day. I don't have to worry about none of that. But I can live in light of how God created me to enjoy Him, to fellowship with Him, and to worship Him all the days of my life and be conformed in the image that He intended me to be from creation. We are running this race. We are doing this for a greater reward. Church, a lot of people may not see what you do when you're faithful and when you're obedient to God. But I come by and encourage you today, God sees. He sees and He knows and He honors. I'm a living witness. He sees, He knows, and He honors. You will get your reward. But we must remain faithful, church. Paul is finishing the letter in Philippians chapter 2 to show us two examples of two great men that now were only faithful to Paul, but they were faithful to the Lord. And because they were faithful to the Lord, that's why they could be faithful to Paul. Church, we are not going to be able to be faithful to the people out there, to a lost and a dying world, if we can't be faithful to God in our own prayer closets, if we can't be faithful to God in our own meditation, if we can't be faithful to God in our own communities, in our own local fellowship. If we can't be faithful here, how can we be faithful out there? Because that's what the world's looking for. Many have told them what they can do for them. Many have told them they can help them in this. But it's been disappointment after disappointment after disappointment. And so when you come up to them with the Bible tract, or when you come with them that Jesus loves you, they say, oh man, I heard this before. I've been down this road before. Give me something else, man. Give me some hope, man. Give me something. Show me. We are to be faithful to know that God rewards faithfulness. My challenge to you today is, do you want to be faithful women and men of God? All right, you had some prayer.